Marissa Nadler, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me again.
And thanks for also, once again, not running like hell from a site called the Great Southern Brain Fart. That's awesome of you.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's a great name.
You wouldn't be surprised how many people are just like I've had lots of PR people who are like, I'm not even going to present this request to my artist because your name is so obnoxious. And I was like, well, they're lost. So
yeah,
I was like, we can have some fun. And they were like, yeah, no. I'm like, okay, fine. But it's okay. They're generally not even my favorite ones anyway. So, but speaking of being one of my favorites, you've been a favorite of mine since oh my God, of course I was going to forget the name of the album. The one after July. What was that? Strangers. Yeah. When I first heard Strangers, I was so blown away because as a folk singer myself, I always look for things that aren't the stereotypical folk music, if that makes sense. I mean, because I feel like it's done so much. Sometimes it's done really well. Sometimes it's not done well at all. But you really kind of had this vibe of, like, it reminded me of like the Americana music that I love, but then it was the old school kind of almost like murder / doom ballad, kind of like the balladeer songs of the old country. And also kind of reminded me a bit of Hope Sandoval from Mazzy Star, who, so to me, it was like a big package of everything. So when you first got started, was this a direction that you stepped into right away? Or how did Marissa Nadler become what Marissa Nadler is?
Yeah, from the very beginning, I was pretty dark. Like, my very first record is called Ballads of Living and Dying. So yes. I really was heavily steeped in a lot of different types of music growing up because my parents were into psychedelic rock and hippies. So there was that. And then I grew up in the grunge era. And then I got into folk music way later. So I think all those different influences just, it organically happened, but I kind of came out with a bang with the very darkest stuff, like songs called The Undertaker. And I think I was just being myself.
It's, again, some of my favorite material because it was so different, again, from the, I was trying to explain it one day to a friend of mine, and I was like, think of if it was like if Alice in Chains was folky, there was like this, like almost kind of a sad, melancholy beauty to it that it's almost like it covered many moods, which I always appreciated. And, but so that's interesting that you kind of came right out of the gates like that, like that you didn't start out, singing happy folk songs.
It was definitely intentional. I remember, like, I was in Rhode Island at the time in art school when I wrote that first record, and I really didn't like coffee shop folk. Like, I was actually pretty art schooly, and would deliberately didn't want to be like everybody else because I had a lot of dudes tell me to cut the reverb off, and this is how you're supposed to finger pick. And, there are plenty of old finger pickers that just use like the thumb and the forefinger, like just all this like traditional stuff really rubbed me the wrong way, weirdly, in the Boston folk scene. So,
well, when there's expectations, if you're a headstrong artist, I kind of feel like the same way, like, like I said, growing up in the South, people kind of have this impression of you of, oh, you must be like Southern rock or whatever, Southern folk. And I always used to say that the one thing that I loved about growing up in the South is that I felt like I was grown up to be like as a natural storyteller, being from New Orleans and lots of embellished stories and whatnot. But one of the things I never wanted to do was to just be, I didn't want to be Avett Brothers or Mumford and Sons. Of course they were much later in my life because, I kind of looked at them and was like, okay, you can have it.
My heart died a little bit when Bob Dylan got on stage with them at the Grammys.
I was just going to say something about that.
It was like one of the more depressing things that I've experienced is like, no, I don't mean to diss other bands. In fact, I make a conscious effort not to, but I definitely think there's, for people that like that band or music, I hope they dig deeper into their inspirations.
It's so funny because I felt the same way about. So I guess, when they first put out their first, that was the Old Crow Medicine show. I lived in North Carolina. My wife and I did for quite a few years. And when they first came out, they were like street buskers. And so I loved them because I always thought that was so cool that they used to just sit out in front of the general store on weekends and just pick and play. But then like they kind of turned into one of those like Mumford, one of those big, amphitheater folk acts. And a part of me died when I found out that Bob Dylan actually gave them a set of lyrics that had never had music to it and basically gave it to them and they got to write that song. And I was like, I can think of 5 other artists off the top of my head that should have had that, And I just remember thinking like, why them? Why?
Sometimes things are just not fair, I think, or whatever, maybe Bob. Yeah, definitely. So,
call it jealousy. I'm sure people would say, you're jealous or whatever, but, I'm not thinking for myself, I'm thinking, like, hey, call Kevin Kenny, from Atlanta or call Marissa Nadler. And give her
maybe one day, fingers crossed. He's getting quite old though.
I don't know, but he keeps pushing, so he might outlive us all. Him and Keith Richards, I'm sure, are just gonna, they'll still be playing long after we're gone, I'm sure.
Must be those ashes he snorted. Keith Richards, it's like some reverse thing where if you like inhale the dust and bones of somebody, you live forever. That's a myth, I know, but it's funny.
You might be onto something, though. Maybe we should look into this. So the funny thing was that the last time you and I talked was it was either right before or right after For My Crimes came out. Mm-hmm. And it was really exciting. And, you and I had been talking about you going out and doing some shows and whatnot. And then that was pre-COVID. And then all of a sudden, like, COVID hit. And then I was like, this is okay, great. Now that means she's not coming to Atlanta, obviously, to, play for me and whoever else is going to be there. And, and it affected so many artists on so many different levels. But what I loved so much being a fan of yours was the level of productivity that came out of you for COVID. Because, I'm sure for you as a fan of music also, you kind of see that like some artists were, kind of folded up and said, I'm going to hibernate and I'm just going to wait this out, while some other artists were just like, okay, well, if I'm at home, I'm going to write music. I'm going to make records, and you put out, you had the Drone Flower album, which was fantastic because it was such a departure for you. And then you did that great covers EP. I mean, not EP, the covers, it was a cassette and a digital album, yeah. I think is what it was. And like, was there an overall shock that kind of hit you at first with the whole lockdown and pandemic? And how long did it take you to kind of come out of that? Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, Ozzy. It's just
I love that his name is Ozzy. You know, the dog next door, his name is Motley.
No, his name is Ozzy Posborn. That was my name. Of course, my wife.
So cute.
He's a 70-pound Doberman, but he's a big baby. So, but anyway, so when it did go into lockdown, you know, was there an initial kind of like freeze for you? And then how long did it take you to kind of come out of it to start getting productive with this stuff that you did?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was scary for everybody. I was worried about my family and worried about, I'm already kind of a shut-in, agoraphobic, and not really in a full on, but indoor kid, So
I live in my basement pretty much. I love it down here. You know?
That's great. Yeah, I haven't left this room in 2 years, I swear. And this is like where I recorded some of the record actually. But I think, I mean, I've always been a bit of a workaholic. I'm very dedicated to my craft and I just moved to a new city. So I had no friends and was afraid to go anywhere. So what else was I going to do but work? And since I make a living only off music, like doing the band camp Fridays was a good thing to like keep me connected with my voice. And I learned piano, just trying not to think about the bad stuff, I guess, staying busy. And it's just what I do. I kind of head down, hope for the best.
It's funny because I was telling a friend of mine the other day that, it actually, it agreed with me, to be honest, the whole concept of, lockdown, and all of a sudden I wasn't forced to have to be in social settings. And, being a writer, I spent a lot of time going to a lot of shows in a lot of dank, packed clubs and drunk people. And, I'm always the guy that's like at the back of the crowd, closest to the door, so that the minute the show's out, I'm like, get the fuck out of there. And I'm in my car and then taking off before my friends even leave the building, And so
me too.
So, so like with all this, I had to find another way also to just like, to me, all of a sudden it was like, wow, this is great. Like, so I spent like $500, $600, $700 worth of, on software, and taught myself how to program drums and, and all of a sudden I'm in heaven, I'm like, man, I'm making an album down here and I don't have to see anybody, and it's kind of, so it was cool to see that really, agreed with you, the covers album, I have to tell you, one of the things I was the most excited about was that you actually covered Moonchild by King Crimson. Yeah. Are you a Crimson fan?
Oh, yeah. My parents, as I said, were like, that was like, I think it was them that turned me on to them. But I love that song. I love that band. And my first concert was Jethro Tull and Procol Harum, like ever.
That's amazing.
And they took us to see the Rolling Stones on the Voodoo Lounge tour, and Neil Young at the Orpheum. So like, I'm lucky in that way. But yeah, I love King Crimson, and I'm definitely a classic rock. Well, I wouldn't even know if they're not really classic rock. They're something bigger entirely.
Yeah, they're like their own entity of sorts. It's like they're just King Crimson. I was super lucky enough to see them a couple times live. And one of the things that always kind of impressed me, and I'm really kind of new into them, a buddy of mine has been trying to get me into them for like 7 years. And I just kept saying, no. And finally I heard them and I was like, there is this kind of dark melancholy, almost there's a folk lying underground to a lot of the songs and whatnot. And so it was really interesting for me to hear you do that song because it sounded like a Marissa Nadler song, you know? So when you're approaching these covers, I mean, shit, you did a Metallica song way better than Metallica. And it's like my least favorite Metallica song, you know? Really? Yeah. And like, but like hearing you do it, it sounded like you, if that makes sense, you know? So when you're approaching these covers, like, do you consciously say like, I've got to kind of change the essence of the song, or is it just kind of natural for you just learning them and playing them?
It's just like I think it's natural. Just like, I don't say I'm going to change this. I think it's just my voice and specific aesthetic leanings in terms of production. Like I also for that covers record was very lucky to work with a really great musician named Milky Burgess, who is he actually played on Strangers too, plays on the new record and did all the covers with me. And he's like, having that available, somebody that can play anything I want is really nice, just because, you know, I love playing guitar, but I really love singing. And like, sometimes I want to have the songs be different than what I'm like. I can definitely finger style well, but I'm not a great like strummer. I've never been a great strummer. And stuff like having the ability to say, you know what song I want to cover, and then bam. So it was fun. That was fun. I have a long list of songs just on my bucket list of like, I'll cover this next, you know?
I was just gonna say, I mean, you've got a whole collection of cover. I mean, correct me was this like your fourth collection of covers? I want to say you maybe it's four, maybe.
Maybe like those are like unofficial kind of collections that over the many, many years I've been releasing music. I put them up on SoundCloud or even MySpace back in the day. And then I sold them on Etsy, and some of them are really not great, like not well recorded, not well sung, because I started out so young and well, not that young, but
young enough.
Definitely like to go back and like re-record my Trouble cover, for instance. Or
that was so good.
I think I could like sing it better now just because my voice got stronger. But yeah, I do love singing other people's songs. It teaches you how to carve out a hook or whatever.
It actually does. There's something about it, learning a cover or a series of covers that I almost feel like kind of not really changes your influence, but kind of maybe might even bring in a new influence in the way that you might approach your own, you know, original material, because you're kind of playing maybe a chord that you didn't play before, or hearing like a lyrical structure or, you know, a bridge and things like that.
Totally.
So you've done a couple of metal covers. Are you a metalhead? Like, or were you?
No, I mean, actually, I have to be honest with you. I'm really not a metalhead. I understand why I mean, I'm on this like periphery of like this, because I sang vocals on a Zaster record. And that was like my first foray into being associated with the metal community. And we're still friends. And I think he's really unique and a real art, like original. I'll say that, you know, so
right.
That was like, I mean, yeah, I liked, I don't really know even what's classified as metal. I like black metal, like ambient, beautiful metal. And I don't really like screaming, like aggressive or fast tempo metal. I love like the stuff that influenced metal, like Black Sabbath is one of my favorite bands. And I know a lot of those bands were came from some of those classic heavier bands originally. And I mostly listen to like ambient music, like, and songs. I love songs,
It's funny because I really, right at the beginning of the pandemic, I started getting really into like soundscapes and things like that. Yeah, kind of like what you were like, these kind of ambient, ethereal, maybe even some like esoteric kind of sound, like the soundtrack for the movie The Witch.
Write that down.
Oh yes, I'll be sure to send you. Actually, okay, yeah. Do you listen to, do you Spotify at all?
I hate to admit it because they're so horrible to artists. But I'm transitioned to stream more on Apple Music because they compensate artists better, or Bandcamp is my preferred method of streaming because they really support artists. But yeah, I do listen on Spotify to like Dateline podcasts like all day long.
One of the things I do is I buy everything from artists and then I listen on Spotify also, so they can get that 0.0001 cent per song.
Like, yeah, you truly need like billions of listens or like very high millions to break through to make any money at all on Spotify.
Oh, I'm not even, like I'm such a small musician that I literally, it's sad if you pull up my Spotify for artists and it's got like the less than sign and it says less than 1,000. And I'm like, wow, you can't even give me a number under 1,000. I'm like, so is it like 10 or is it like 999? So, but like one of the things I was, like I think I've had music from my solo stuff in my bands on Spotify for probably like 7-8 years. And I just got a payout 2 weeks ago for $25.
That's funny.
Which was fucking awesome. Because by the time it actually went through, it was like $22 because there's like a service fee and shit. I was just like, this is why my dad said I'd never make a living doing this.
That's pretty funny. I can really, really, really relate. Like I have some of my old records that like got really well reviewed at like painfully low streaming numbers to like July, which a lot of people think is one of my best records. Is like not a song that it's just like you have to really work. That's why the social media stuff is why I'm so tired. I'm like, I hate doing it, but I have to do it. And it's killing me. It's like the most evil of necessary evils to do. Like, and I can't even imagine, especially, I mean, like, what is it like for you to, from the social media side? Because I also know that you have a lot of pretty like intense fans as well. Is it hard to deal with sometimes? And it's definitely hard for somebody like me to deal with because if I had my way, I probably would never perform live again. Like I'm happy. I mean, I love singing and connecting with people, but it's everything else. Like, I don't know if you've seen What We Do in the Shadows yet, that show about vampires. Well, there's a lot of Colin Robinsons out there and he's the psychic vampire.
I love that show, by the way. It's so great.
So good. And I really relate to that because I feel like there's a lot of like energy vampires out there. So when you're a sensitive, porous person like myself, it can be very overwhelming. And the minute you start getting really good reviews, there's always somebody that's going to want to bring you down. Like it's just yin and yang. Like somebody wants to be a contrarian, somebody that thinks like, oh, like if they only knew how many years of toiling away in absolute obscurity. It's just like, it's a little tough. Luckily, the majority of the stuff on this cycle in the past few years, I've noticed a change where certain blogs are not as influential and people's voices are more like people are picking what they like. The internet's and social media does give like the individual person a little bit more of a voice. But yeah, I get some total psychos. I hit block a lot. Like I love some stalkers, some really like stuff that makes me super uncomfortable, but it is what it is. Like I'm
creepy old men.
Well, I stopped doing my merch myself finally after all these years just last week, because it's like when you have to mail stuff overseas, you need to put a phone number on it. I had PO boxes, but still it's like, anyway, I'm just excited for the cycle to be over so I can crawl back into my productivity chain, like that's my happy place, is like painting or making music and stuff.
It's interesting because, like what you were talking about with the playing live thing is that, I was in kind of a folk rock band here in Atlanta for about 6 or 7 years. It was a trio that I had put together, and I loved playing live, but I was also just recently diagnosed with ADHD. And one of the things that I've learned, especially as I've been going through this, is that there is this way of like people like me, we overcompensate for the ADHD. So we come across as being these super social people and almost extroverted, but it was more like when I'm around more than 2 people, like I'm dying inside. I'm just like, please, like, let me go, and then all of a sudden I'm like, what, and people are like, oh, Don is the ring holder. And I'm just like, no. And I think with playing live, as much as I enjoyed it, it always kind of seemed somewhat of a hindrance to me too, because I was like, I really just want to make music and, record and make the best kind of recordings I can do in my little home studio. But, like if I'm going to go back to ever playing live, like I'm going to go play on my fucking porch and have like 5 or 6 people over that I actually like being around. So feel free to come over, because there won't be more than like 5 or 6 people here.
You're in Atlanta? Yeah. Now that I'm in Nashville, that's not that far.
Yeah. We're actually in Stone Mountain, so you won't even need to go into the city, which would be great.
Because last time I played Atlanta, was at the Bottle Tree, or what's the name of that indie venue? I got a check for $13 that show.
Was it the Earl? Did you play the Earl?
I think it might have. I don't remember. It's like on the ground floor. You load in through the back. All I remember was like there were 4 people there, and my openers got paid more than I did, and it was one of those nights where you never forget. Like that check it was like $22 or something. But yeah.
Look, I've played gigs where I owed the venue, and I'm like, I don't even know how that happens. It's like, how did my band play? And then at the end of the night, we owed the bar, $25. I'm like,
we drank too much or something.
I'm like, no, and that's the other thing is that like, I'm like a 2 beer guy at the like I drink like 2 beers a month, and so after I'm like, we drank like $10 worth of beer between 3 band members. Like, why do we owe you $25?
Not surprising. Like now when I play nice places, like I'm still so shocked and grateful, because I did change in a lot of rest stops and pee in cups backstage and stuff like that. Like, what are you going to do if I'm not going to walk through a crowd? Like, have to like get it's just like, anyway, so moving on up.
Club bathrooms are disgusting. Seriously. It's like they grow things in there for science. I don't understand that anyway, but I love that we actually just went into the bathroom topic. That was pretty cool.
I'm sorry. I'm like going to probably regret that, but I think I've revealed that in other interviews as well. So anyway.
Well, I like it that it's just a loose conversation here anyway.
Yeah.
So, but, so to kind of go back a little bit with the For My Crimes album, one of the things I loved so much was that it was this kind of stripped down album, but yet lyrically and musically, especially from like, the earlier releases, you could tell there was like this steady growth, lyrically, that just seems to come with experience. But then like all of a sudden, we get to, the new album. And of course I want to get the title right because I feel like I've said it like a few different ways, and it's Path of the Clouds, correct?
The Path of the Clouds.
The Path of the Clouds. Okay, so I actually got the because for a while I was writing The Path to the Clouds, and I was like, this is gonna suck if I get this wrong. But the songs on that album, again, lyrically, seemed to kind of go even to another level. So would you say that like with experience as we grow, I hate to say older because that comes with negative connotations, but I like getting older. I think getting older is cool because it means we've seen things.
Me too.
So do you feel like that with age comes a whole new, I don't know what I'm trying. Yeah, I don't know if you might know what I'm trying to say. Basically, like as we get older, perspective. Thank you. Is there a whole different perspective in the way you look at things as songs?
I think it has, for me at least, I can only speak for myself, that it has a lot to do with work ethic. Like I spent a really long time writing those songs. But I do think that getting older makes you look elsewhere for inspiration. Like when you're 22, the most natural thing to do when you get your heart broken is to write heartbreak records. But like when you're a career artist that already has made many heartbreak records, like I knew I couldn't do that again. I knew that I had to reach deeper and to other and more universal themes. I mean, love is the most universal theme of all, and so is heartbreak. But there's different themes on this record that I don't think I've touched on previously, like faking your death or vanishing, jumping out of airplanes, stuff like that.
So I guess like any other artist, or, whether it's, you're a painter or a photographer or a drawer, which you are a little bit of all, like those kinds of songs, like you said, like vanishing and jumping out of planes or whatever, like do those come from like a certain part of your psyche, or is it just something that you kind of go back to the storytelling thing? Like, is it a story that fascinates you, or is it something that's kind of deep inside of your own?
Yeah, I always loved watching like Law and Order SVU and Dateline and
love those.
48 Hours Murder Mystery and Unsolved Mysteries, and plus lots of movies. I just I have a voracious appetite for entertainment, and that's the kind of stuff that does it for me. And so I was like, holed up in this room, and I had this idea a long time ago to make an Unsolved Mysteries record. Like initially I was going to do the whole record like that, but I decided,
that's amazing.
And then my labels were a little like I didn't want it to be too kitschy, like, because you can have inspiration for songs about anything, but it's the songs that matter, not like the inspiration behind them. So I ended up like kind of getting off on these tangents, like, well, why am I writing these songs? What do they really mean? And it became very clear to me that a song like Bessie, Did You Make It? It really isn't just about Bessie. It's about me, and why am I so fixated on a woman disappearing, faking her death, and possibly killing her husband or something? And let's just leave that at that. But so I just realized that through writing about other people, I was able to write more about complex emotional things that I didn't feel comfortable sharing with the world. And such a vulnerable way. Like when I wrote For My Crimes, like some of the press like really bothered me. I'm not just some of the stuff they wrote about, like kind of like I was kind of really heavily suggested by my manager to like put my personal life in the press release. And then I had to deal with it. Like every single review, like domestic, like just like strife and broken relationships. It was so painful. So maybe that was part of the reason I went into some more cosmic inspiration. It maybe a little, of course, there's really, really brutally honest songs on this record, but you have to wait a little to get to them. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, because one of the things I feel like that I connect with you as a writer too is, again, because when I'm writing a song, I love to write in the third person, I feel like there's so many people out there, songwriters who are first person songwriters that you're like, okay, I get it. Like you're sad, you're miserable, you're so emo, like you cry a lot and, whatever, but there was always something about me enjoying or relating to a songwriter who could create a character, but that character was actually maybe 70 to 80% of themselves. But so you were hearing about a character, you were listening to their story, and it would make you think like, okay, how much of that is actually them, if that makes sense. So it's like the indirectness of that I have always appreciated in songs. And that's one of the things I love about, so many of your songs, especially with the new album, is that you kind of went more into that. I felt like this time around where it seemed to be more vague and almost kind of like a narrative of sorts that you haven't visited a whole lot, if much at all.
Yeah, it's definitely a very different record. What was I going to say? I was thinking as you were talking about Tangled Up in Blue and the two versions of it, there's like early one morning, the sun was shining. I was laying in bed sorry. And then it was like I can't remember which is which, cause I was deep into the demos, but they really I think he wrote it initially first person talking about himself and changed it to he and she, and didn't affect like the power of the song, but it's interesting. Well, he's definitely somebody that writes a story song like nobody's business, like Hurricane or, well, anyway, you just made me think of that because
Ballad of a Thin Man, songs like that. Like I almost feel like some of his songs don't make a whole lot of sense, but yet they do by not making sense. If you know what I mean, like it's like abstract. It's abstract. It's the best way I could always.
He had some abstract. He has certainly a very abstract phase in his career when he wrote like Desolation Row and Visions of Johanna. He was like going off on these beautiful, surrealistic, poetic journeys. Those were some of the very first songs I ever learned how to play on guitar, because my brother was like my almost famous, that movie when she's like, be cool. Like my brother kind of made me cool at like turning me on to cool music and taught me how to play guitar and stuff. And like, I just remember, I forgot what I was going to say. I did have a point.
That's okay. You can keep going
as well. So yeah.
Did your brother like tell you to like light a candle and listen to Blonde on Blonde? You know,
he made me write fan fiction about Yes record covers.
No way, really?
He's a novelist, actually. He's a great writer and like a professor of literature. So my earliest memories are because we had my parents' vinyl collection, and I wanted to be a good writer like he was. He was like phenomenally gifted from a very early age, whereas I was very introverted and shy, and not that I was maybe not as confident with my writing. And maybe I wasn't bad, but you know how it takes a while to feel good about yourself when you're living up to great things. And he did definitely like also, yeah, he was like, listen to this record, like this, listen. Yeah. So
I want to hear more about this, like short story, like fan fiction based on album covers. Like that's like all of a sudden when you told me that, like in my mind, I'm going, like, I'm thinking of like Yes songs and like Closer to the Edge, you know, but then all of a sudden I'm even thinking like, I wonder if I could do this with like Maiden album covers.
It
like
would be a very cool theme for a record. Like put yourself as a character inside record covers. Like, and like I'm walking through a black space in a rainbow triangle, trying to find you. Like,
I love it.
You know what I mean? Like that could be, I think writing exercises are very helpful. Like the Unsolved Mysteries thing at first was definitely an exercise, but then I was like, these songs are really cool. Like I have some early demos of them where I learned Contact, that program where you can program like mellotrons and stuff. Right. Yeah. Some of the early demos of these songs are like very different sounding. So I'll probably release those at some point.
I actually find this as a writer super cool to hear about these kind of writing exercises, because I feel like, especially, you know, a musician, even like yourself, I'm sure, like you can never learn everything and you can never get too much knowledge about things to do. And now all of a sudden, as you're talking, like I kind of lost track of what you're saying, because all of a sudden I was thinking about what album covers I could write about, you know, and you know,
it actually is like a really, and now I'm like, I'm going to make that record. I mean, you might beat me to it, but that's like, just sounds like fun.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's collaborate then, and we'll hit the finish line together. You know? So.
Like Strangers was I did cut up method. Like I think sometimes it's okay to use these things, you know.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by cut out method?
It was a writing method, like popularized by William Burroughs, I think.
Okay.
And David Bowie used it in his writing, where you just actually cut up words, cut up like magazines and like make like collages out of those words. That's how I wrote a lot of the songs on Strangers at first, like Divers of the Dust. Like I would like, I'm so like, there's nothing new going on in my life. And it's a way of like, even sometimes words themselves can just be like, ooh, I love that. Divers of the Dust. What does that mean? Are we in the apocalypse? Like,
I'm putty in your hands. I just remember thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, this lyric. I mean, that's so funny, because that really gives me a little more insight thinking about those songs now on that album, about some of the, you know, like we were talking about, like, God, I'm so terrible at losing words when I talk to people. Like the, just the kind of like randomness of the words, you know, how it all just kind of seems to fit together. But at the same time, you're like, how did these words actually work together? Because they're not what I would normally, like, I wouldn't talk like that, you know, or I wouldn't necessarily write like that organically.
It like the cut up thing was definitely like the starting point. What I would do is then I would actually use a glue stick, tape like collages down, then type out what I had written, and then turn them into couplets, and then say like, well, what does this mean? And then write organically, like looking at them as inspiration. Mm-hmm. I think that similarly, yeah, the new record was very much like some of the reviews are just like glomming onto the Unsolved Mysteries thing, but there's really only 3 songs on the record that are true stories, and the rest are about me. But, you know, people just need a tagline. Like, people do love true crime. So if it turns people on to my music, that's all that matters, you know?
And I'm always frustrated a lot of times which is one of the things I started doing interviews for in the first place, like years ago, was because I used to get annoyed by reading interviews or, listening to podcasts and like, why are these same questions? It's like so many people like to, hone in on like one aspect of something. And like you were talking about, like with the true crimes thing, that wasn't even really something I thought about. Like I didn't even have anything to talk about with that. Like I was more about to say that with the album, I felt like it had a little more of that character development that we were talking about earlier, but that I kind of got the sense that it was a little more personal, but yet you still don't let on about, like, okay, I've decided to do a record about me. You know what I mean? Like it still had that kind of, like I like it wasn't super obvious to me that I was like, oh, she's making a self-indulgent record.
No, that's good. Yeah. I think if you give too much away, it takes away the mystery. And I think a lot of art is best when it leaves the listener or the viewer their own way to enter and connect with the song. Like, I mean, I have a background as a fine art teacher, so maybe that's why I think so much like that. Like, well, I don't want to tell you exactly what it's about, and I'm not going to, because then that's all that anyone's ever going to hear. And people, like, I have connections with songs that I love for reasons that are my own. Like, oh, that's like Shelter from the Storm just reminds me so much of a time in my life. I keep mentioning Bob Dylan songs for some reason, but
no, but I love that because that's your connection, that's like that's what, that's what you relate to, that it makes sense. So anyway, I'm sorry, you're talking about Shelter from the Storm.
Yeah. It's like sometimes a song can just remind you of a time in your life. Like, so I try not to like spell out what the meanings of these songs are, because I want people to find their own meaning in them.
Well, to me, that's the best part about it, is because, and I'm sure maybe you're the same way as far as listening to songs, but I like the idea of hearing something and you having to kind of come to your own conclusions or paint your own pictures, or again, like I said, I love to use the word narrative, but I feel like it's so synonymous to like this writing and songs in general, is that you can either be completely transparent and give it away, or you can kind of create something that makes people almost create, are you familiar with Michael Nesmith, for the guy, from the Monkees, who's one of my favorite songwriters of all time. And he did a tour probably about 7 years ago, and he called it Movies of the Mind. And what he did was he took a collection of all his songs and grouped them into like triplets, like sections of 3. And he created a narrative that told a story that combined all 3 songs, even though those 3 songs were not even remotely connected. But he made this way of making you hear these songs and being like, okay, like I can totally see the imagery and I can see the connection, and to me, that's what makes listening to music interesting to me,
I agree. I love that song. What is it? Her name was Joanne. Oh, so good. She lived in the meadow. I actually really want to cover that song. That's on my list. Yeah, it's really good.
I mean, oh my God, Joanne, the crippled lion. Oh my God. I mean, there's just so many, some of Shelley's blues. Yeah. You should just do a whole album of his stuff.
I do need to get more into him. I got to dig deeper. Yeah.
Well, hang tight because I'll send you some stuff to dive into. But speaking of, matter of fact, before I forget, because one of the things I was talking about when I was listening, when we were talking about Spotify and everything, was that when I started to get into this kind of new music, during the lockdown, I started getting into soundscapes. I started getting into making them myself because a friend of mine gave me a bunch of software and stuff to kind of play with on the iPad and the computer. And but I started discovering people like Anna von Hauswolf and Darker and things like that. Are you familiar with those artists at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it was cool to hear because all of a sudden in my mind, I was like, okay, wow, now I feel like Marissa Nadler has this kind of a home in my mind of music that maybe not everyone else would connect you to.
Yeah. I mean, I think stylistically I could hear some, but I think I definitely get grouped in with like a lot of like the Gothic ambient stuff. However, I'm very much like a song, like I'm a bit different in terms of like the nerdiness of my songwriting, maybe, or it's more, maybe more slightly different influences, but I can see I do have a home. Like, I'm friends with a ton of these musicians and try to support as many, especially women musicians, as I can, just because people like to compare and pitch you against when power and like the, whatever you want to call it, community. Yeah.
I always kind of thought of you as kind of almost like Americana Gothic, like your stuff definitely strikes me. And I think, and that's probably why I connected with you more so than a lot of other songwriters that you sometimes seem to be lumped in with, is because it's almost that kind of Woody Guthrie, that kind of darker side of Americana, where, Americana music to some people is very, happy, let's do a jig around the campfire, but there's always this darker side to the Americana, there's an ambience to it, like you said earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely influenced by like all the classics. Like, I love Johnny Cash and Hank Williams and Dolly Parton, and I love the Beatles, and I don't know, I just wide-ranging influences. Mariah Carey, Beyonce, I love. Like, I mean, it's just, but you know what? They're all, a good song is a good song, right? That's what and I love great singers too. So.
I love that. Yeah. I always say, regardless of the genre of music, if a song is good, a song is good, But so with the new album, what I loved is that there seems to be, you kicked it up a notch too. There's some instrumentation in there that I was not ready for. And, like, drums and bass but things that like didn't even, not that it livened up, but it's almost like it made it even like darker, and it kind of put some extra weight to those songs. And, was that a conscious effort for you when you were kind of coming up with the songs and going to record them? Like, did you kind of envision that's the result was going to be?
No, it just happened organically. I mean, I have a set of really great players. Like, Milky played a lot on this record. A lot of the electric guitar. I played a lot of the acoustic guitar. Milky did some of the synths and arranged a little. And I had then my piano teacher, Jesse Chandler. He did the beautiful woodwinds that you hear in piano.
So beautiful. I was going to ask you about those next. Yeah.
Oh, he's amazing. And it's really unique sounds. And it's just, some of the songs like couldn't have done the killing when I wrote it. Like, I wrote it with bar chords strumming it. And I'm like, this needs to rock. Like, I mean, much to people's like misinterpretation, I loved it, may be a slow rocker, but it's getting added to the folk playlist. And I'm like, this is not folk. Like, come on, that's not a folk song. That is like pretty much a rock song, if you ask me. Like,
right. Whatever. No, I totally realized it, because that was the other thing too, was that, and even just the influences in general, like, I made notes about, some of the songs. I remember like with the title track, it seemed to have kind of a Pink Floyd influence, but yet it had that Southern kind of twang with like the tremolo guitar to it. And that was an area that I hadn't heard you go into yet, so
Fresh Blood. Yeah. The Pink Floyd is like my all-time favorite. So it's no surprise it's finally coming through. Like, I love Pink Floyd, and that was like my favorite band growing up. And
you are my best friend ever.
I can't stand people that say that like Pink Floyd got bad after Syd Barrett. I'm like, are you serious? Like, that's such bullshit. Sure, I don't really. When you get up to like the Division Bell era, I love like Animals, Metal, Dark Side, the soundtrack to the film
More.
Whatever.
Yeah.
The color green. That sounds so pretty. Big influence. So,
I used to cover that one in my folk sets.
Oh, cool.
Green is the color. Yeah. Love that.
God, I'm getting so many good ideas. I'm going to make a little list, because that's also, I need to like chill out, because you can't like, there's a thing where it's like, I don't want to be too prolific, or else people won't listen when I put something really good out. They're like, it's your 9th album. I'm like, yeah, but this one's better. Come on. And it's,
no, this is the best one.
I happen to like it the best because I produced it myself, and there was no manager. Like, it was just a real feminist outing on my part. Like,
well, that was going to be my other thing, was that, when you are your own all hands on deck, that's got to be a much more gratifying thing than having so many hands on the pot, because now you can kind of look at it and kind of go, I formed that with my own hands for the most part, as opposed to having a bunch of people come in and say, oh, I'm going to turn this knob, and no.
And nobody turned it into anything I didn't want them to turn it into. Like, but that has happened to me before in studios, and because of the nature of my personality, I think I can come across as a real pushover. So I think I'm going to keep producing my own records, like, and maybe even produce other people's records sometime.
I love that. You can produce my next one if you want.
Sounds cool.
Because I definitely tend to fall into the whole, I cave a lot. Even when I was in a band, if I was in the studio with my band and we were recording and I had this idea, if everyone was like, I think we should do this, I'd be like, okay. And then when it was done, I'd go, oh, I wish we would have done it this way, but I'm not going to say anything.
Path of least resistance. I know. I hate conflict too.
But then whenever you hear it, do you go back yourself and go, do you still listen to certain things with some regret, or
yes,
is there a level of acceptance?
You have to accept it. I mean, I have entire records I would like take off the internet if they weren't like paying my bills, or, like, just because I was so young, like, that I don't like the way that I sang at the very beginning, like my second record. I just like had so much vibrato, hanging out with people that were rubbing off on me, sending me all these like British Isles folk records. And I was like, I'm an opera singer now. And so I regret like some of my moves. Yeah. And that's part of it. You have to just let it go. I don't have anybody rich enough to like clean up my reputation on the internet.
Scrub that shit down.
Yeah, it's just like, exactly. So,
but you're also in this weird place because it's like you don't have anyone rich enough to do it, but you're also too popular to do it yourself. So it's like I think my shit. I think I could disappear off the internet and no one would know. where I went,
Oh, well, I'm sure that's not true. Maybe you don't know how close you are to 1,000, I'm sure you're going to break that arrow. But yeah, I have deleted a few things that I was embarrassed by, and people do get mad. Like they think they own you.
You owe it. Why did you take that down? That was mine, and you're like,
I bought it. And I'm like, anyway, so I'm leaving it all up there, but I might re-record some of the early stuff.
I think that there's something cool to be said about that, because I've thought about doing that with some of my own early folk stuff, because I can't listen to it at all. Like I listen to it and I go, God, you sound so unsure of yourself and so unconfident. And I'm like, the stuff that I recorded when I was 23, at 48, I was like, oh, I could do that so much better. I mean, I don't think I could sing better. I'm not a great singer, but I could at least sing it with more confidence, and be a better guitar player, but there's something to be said about that, So, well, I guess to close out real quick, what is your plans for the album? I know you said you don't like to tour or play live, though. Are you? Well,
I should clarify. I don't know. I have mixed emotions about it. Like I get nervous and it takes a lot out of me. But yeah, I have a gig, like record release show in New York City.
And do you have any like a tour planned or anything, or?
Not right now. I'm playing Psycho Las Vegas, that big festival this summer. I told both of my booking agents, like, let's just take it on a case by case basis as the offers come in, because COVID is still real and I'm not like young enough to be immune to it, even vaccinated. And so like I'm not like that comfortable with the concept of like playing while a pandemic is still killing over 1,000 people a day in the country. So it's like, I'm doing it. I hope it's like eradicated or under control by like the spring or summer. And I would like to do like some, we'll see what happens. I don't know. I mean, if there's a demand and like, I would do it, and you get a little scarred for life playing for like people talking through you and like heckling you, and but I'm like kind of doing a disservice. I can put a good live show on. I have in my life, but
so I've seen on YouTube, by the way, like it's the only way I've seen you live, but you hold your own.
I think this show is going to be great because I'm putting together, it's going to be the whole record start to finish, plus some covers at the end. And then like, we like really good musicians. So it's not as much pressure on me to fill up all the space, finger picking or playing the whole time, doing harmonies with pedals. Like we have a real harmony now, like with a real person.
Well, that's going to be great because like you said, I think it's going to really represent the sound of the new album and maybe even bring something new to some of the older songs that maybe didn't have that kind of presence in the past.
Yeah. Hope so.
Well, Marissa, I swear I am so the new album is fantastic. I love it. I love hearing that you're continuing to just wow me as a music lover. And, I really hope that more people listen to it and get out of it, at least what I get out of it. And I hope you make it down to Atlanta.
Oh, cool. Love to. Thanks so much for talking to me again.
Well, thanks for hanging out and good luck with everything.
Thank you. You too.
Storm.